Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're reading Sharon Draper's Copper's Son, and we are on chapter 16. This is part two. Remember, it's a pretty long chapter, and Polly and Amari are getting acquainted with Teenie and her son Tidbit, two slaves on the Derbyshire plantation. And as Polly was explaining a few things, she started talking about her parents, and Teenie just asked how they died. Polly, when she talks about her parents, as you could tell when she was talking to Mr. Derby and Clay, and they found out about her parents dying, they really didn't care. Like they could care, they could care less, as they say. But they had no interest in her dying. They didn't show any type of sympathy. But as you can see, as you'll see here, Teenie was actually concerned about Polly, at least her parents, just showing some human decency, some basic human decency, which you'll notice is totally different because the slave masters and white people of the era don't believe that slaves have that. This is Polly's first real realization that, oh, like this slave, this black person has some type of empathy and sympathy with me. So just pay attention to Polly as the chapters continue. Excuse me. Oh, child, how they die? Teeny's face grew tender. Polly looked at her and saw that Teeny really wanted to know. My father was born in England, and he was a good-looking man, she began. She smiled as she thought of his charming grin. He told me ladies used to follow him home from the pubs every night. He would buy them fine wine and expensive gifts and tell them the lies they wanted to hear. He lived a grand life until he ran out of money. She paused. He was thrown in jail like a common criminal just because he couldn't pay his debts. Teeny sucked in her breath but made no comment. He had friends in the court system, however, and he was given the chance to start over in the colonies as an indentured servant. He came here on a prison ship, a frightful experience, he said. Eventually, his indenture was sold to a man named Jeremy Carton in Beaufort, right here in Carolina Colony. That's where he met my mother, who put an end to his fondness for other ladies, but not, however, his affection for ale and wine. I was born there. The slave girl gently petted the dog under the table, looking as if she was trying to follow the conversation. Polly continued. My father worked like an ordinary slave on a tobacco farm. She looked up to see if Teeny had reacted to that, but Teeny simply continued to stir the food in the pot over the fire. She used a whisk that looked like it was made from the twig of a tree. He worked hard, but he could never make enough money to pay off his debt. My daddy was a good man, but not real careful with what little money he got. He drank too much sometimes. Polly shifted on the bench a little. What about your mama? Teeny asked gently. My mother come up rough. She was an orphan. She was shuffled from family to family most of her childhood. She learned to make do for herself most of her life. She worked as a maid when she could, as a beggar when she couldn't. Well, pick my peas. A white woman as a maid and a beggar? Must not be no slaves from where she come from, Teeny commented. Not all white people are rich landowners, Polly said almost coldly. Most white folks I know scuffle for every scrap of food they get. But they ain't slaves, Teeny reminded her quietly. Go on, child. And just to pause for a second, that's kind of a common thing, a class issue. There was once a video I watched where it was where like the rich landowners did want to keep poor white people at odds with slaves and keep that mentality going on. And even to this day, when people talk about white privilege and things like that, like some certain people get upset because they're like, yo, I work hard. I do this, do that, and it's hard to get by. And classism is an issue that needs to be dealt with. But a lot of times with African Americans, and other minorities, sometimes you have to deal with classism, plus you have to deal with racism on top of it. A lot of people don't understand that dichotomy. Polly thought for a moment and continued. My father kept getting in trouble, spending months in jail, was unable to pay back his indenture. My mother tried her best to keep us together as a family, even signing on with Mr. Carton as an indenture herself. But there was never enough work or money or food, even though she offered to do other people's laundry after her work was done for Carton. Nobody would hire a white woman because folks knew they could get slaves to do the work for free. Polly tensed as she thought of the unfairness. Teeny took that moment to cut each girl a large piece of pumpkin pie. She cut a tiny piece for Tidbit, who stuffed most of it into his mouth in one bite, then grinned a large orange grin. The rest he gave to the dog. Well, the sun don't shine on the same dog's tail all the time, Teenie said philosophically. Everybody got hard times at one time or the other. I suppose, Polly began again, this time speaking very slowly. But then, 3 months ago, my parents came down with smallpox. Teenie stopped chopping the onions for a moment. Daddy died first, and then 3 days later, my mother. I nursed them both, and I never got as much as a pimple. She paused, stood up, and walked outside the hot cookhouse, taking deep breaths. I am not going to cry, she sternly told herself. When she felt she could continue, she went back into the kitchen. So how you end up here, gal? Teenie rattled a stack of 10 plates. Mr. Jeremy Cotton decided I must sign on to pay back what my parents owed him, and I had no choice but to do it. He's just a small dirt farm, so I suppose to prevent me from running off, and I would have, too. He took me with him to Charlestown to get supplies yesterday. But then he met Mr. Derby in a tavern, and he somehow sold my indenture to him. I'm not sure how or why, so here I am. 7 years pay back your indenture ain't bad, Teenie pointed out. You was young, you got plenty of time to make your place in this here world. White women with indentures got it easy. Eventually you could fit in. Polly glanced over at Teenie, surprised at the emotion in her voice. Teenie poked fiercely at the coals in the hearth. And I probably didn't read that right, but you could kind of tell that Teenie is visibly upset. You may ask why she's upset, but here is this person talking about an indentured servitude. She has to work for 7 years. Teenie's probably easily 30 years old. You know what I mean? Like, she has no way of being free. She'll never be free. So Polly's talking about her hardships and everything she went through. And sure, Polly did have it rough. She did have, again, this is that classism. She had it rough, being looked down upon, being poor. That was bad. But she didn't have it like Polly. Or, like Teenie. And Teenie's visibly upset. Like, I got to sit here, listen to this. I'll never be free. I got to die in bondage, helping other people, fearing for my life every single day. My kid has to live through that. I might be separated from my kid. My kids got to go through that. So it's a little, while she's listening to Polly, Teenie's getting a little upset. I must pay back 14 years, Polly told her. I must pay my own plus what was left of my parents' indentures. Mr. Derby says I should be glad he was willing to take on all that debt. I suppose I should be thankful, but I'm 15 years old. By the time I pay him back, I'll be almost 30, a wrinkled old woman. She stared for a long time at the blazing embers in Teenie's fireplace. 30 ain't so bad, Teenie said quietly. That's close to how old I'd be as far as I could tell. She gazed out the door of the small kitchen house, looked dreamily down the path that led away from the plantation. And the reason she can't tell her age, just to pause, and this is a problem that happened with a lot of African Americans as the years progressed. They really didn't keep too much track about the births of slaves, as far as, you were born on January the 5th, 1750. Like, it wouldn't have been that. Like, oh yeah, she was born sometime 1750, and that would be it. Didn't care about the month. You guys are property. You don't care about the day and time that a cow was born, or, a pig or livestock. And it was kind of like that. Polly watched as Amari moved closer to Teenie and touched her hand. Something seemed to pass between them, a look of understanding, perhaps. Amari whispered a few words in her own language. Teenie moved away abruptly and returned to her brisk command of the room. All right, go on now. You two girls get out of here. It'll be almost dark, and I'll expect you both at dawn. Tidbit, go fetch me some wood for my fire, and take that dog with you, she yelled, although she didn't seem angry. The boy disappeared into the yard. Amari and Polly headed slowly back to the little cabin. Polly watched amazed as Amari rushed to grab the mat on the floor, shook it out, then curled up on it quickly. Why are you laying on the floor? Amari covered her head with her arms. You don't want to sleep in the bed? Again, the slave girl ignored her. Polly shrugged and climbed up to the narrow cot. The straw-filled mattress was lumpy and smelled of moldy vegetables, but it was better than anything she had felt in a long time. She slept. The knock on the door startled Polly awake. It was Tidbit, looking like a tiny night spirit. He was shivering, and so was his dog. Master Clay said he wants his birthday present now. I'm here to take her there. Polly gasped with realization and reached over to shake Amari awake. Amari sat up and looked from Polly to the trembling child. Her face was a question. Polly said slowly and with genuine sorrow, You must go with Tidbit. Master Clay is asking for you. Amari looked at Polly, then the child, and suddenly seeming to understand, she groaned, No, 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 she begged. Polly touched her arm, but couldn't think how to help her. Tidbit stood silently, shifting from foot to foot, looking very uncomfortable. Amari finally took a deep breath, stood up without a word, and followed the child out of the door. The night was very dark. All right, so we're finishing up chapter 16. And we kind of already talked about how Teenie and Polly, their relationship. Teenie is basically kind of like, quote unquote, the head slave, which is a weird word to say. She's running the plantation, at least as far as the kitchen goes, and doing chores outside of the big house. So Polly, who, of course, has had it rough. I don't think we could deny that. But Teenie did get a little upset, a little emotional about the things that Teenie has had to go through, which we don't know. But it was obviously a harsh life where she didn't have any say in a lot of things. So, and we see here at the end the fate of Amari, what Amari has to deal with. We haven't got to see the actual work that she had to do, but we know now what is her role when it comes to Clay, who's the birthday boy, so to speak. And that was her job as the birthday president of Derby. That's, his main reason he got her. So we're finishing up here. We'll be back with chapter 17. We'll be going back to Amari's perspective for part 3. So thanks for reading with us. I'll see you on the next one.